Hi everybody, this is Chris Ryan, and I'm going to take you through my presentation, which is titled Middle School Students' Misconceptions Regarding Climate Change. Where do we go from here? So first we'll have a look at some of the information that I came across in my literature review. And as you can see here, the literature demonstrates that students hold many misconceptions about climate change. So I think the overall findings were basically that kids are familiar with terms like climate change, global warming, and greenhouse gases, but they really don't have a firm grasp on what exactly these things are and kind of how they interact with one another, and how the processes work. So not only is there confusion about atmospheric phenomena, but there's a lot of confusion about environmental issues in general. A lot of these kids clearly are engaged in discussions about what's good or bad for the environment. So they've kind of developed these value sets and basically hold that whatever's bad for the environment must have to do with pretty much any environmental issue. For example, if we look at these two statements that were made in one of the studies I looked at for my review, these folks interviewed kids in grades 5 through 10. They had hundreds of responses, so a pretty good sample size. And these statements were that the greenhouse effect can be made smaller by keeping beaches clean, and the greenhouse effect can be made smaller by using unleaded gasoline. The kids marked several of them that they thought they were right. Many of them didn't know. Some of them thought maybe they were wrong. But, it's pretty clear that even though kids might think that things like pollution on the beach are bad, they don't really see that there's not truly a tie between these two issues. So again, they're kind of extending their thoughts about what's good or bad for the environment to different environmental issues that really have no tie to that. And so moving on, trying to identify, where these students are getting these misconceptions, looking at the sources of their information. Of course, a lot of the thought is that these misconceptions are due to effects from the media. So the study below here, again, that I looked at for my review, television was definitely the number one source for the students in this study, followed kind of a distant second by printed materials like books and magazines. Teachers in school actually came in third, and their personal experiences came in last. So I actually also looked at a couple of studies that did focus on teachers, and the majority of the teachers that were interviewed for these studies definitely said that their students have an interest in learning about climate change. Clearly this is a topic they hear a lot about, so they'd like to learn about it themselves, but the teachers really say that they lack the content knowledge to be able to provide the information to these kids. So in moving forward, definitely needs to be a focus on professional development for these teachers. Aside from just providing them with the content, I think that it's really important to also realize they need support from district staff, also administration, to have support to teach these issues in their classroom. Because, a lot of teachers, I'm sure, just don't have the time to cover these issues, so they really need to be worked into the curriculum. So moving forward, looking at my results, I distributed a questionnaire to 34 7th grade students here in kind of coastal central Florida, and I have some of the demographic information from those kids here. You can see that many of them chose to not identify their ethnicity, but other than that, we had a pretty diverse group, and there's the gender breakdown. So these kids did have a questionnaire. It was relatively short. It was just 10 questions. I figured that, many of these middle school students might not have an incredible attention span for a survey like this, so I chose to keep it pretty short, and it was mostly questions, and there were a couple of short answer sections as well. So we'll have a quick the instrument. The first question here asks them how much they think they know about global warming and climate change. The second question is where they could fill in some short answers if they could list any way in which global warming and climate change would impact the planet, the ocean, people, and Florida. And they could also mark that they didn't know what climate change would do. Next, they could mark all of the sources where they had heard information on global warming and climate change. Next, we asked them to indicate where they would look first to learn more about global warming and climate change. And then on the back side of the sheet, they were asked what they thought is the primary cause for climate change. Next was how much risk they personally faced and also the planet faced from climate change in the next 50 years. And then kind of on the action side of things, how much effort they thought they should make to reduce the impacts of climate change. And then the last two are just the demographic information. We move forward to some of the results here. You can see that the vast majority of them indicated that they don't know too much about global warming and climate change. There were a few that said they do know a lot or a good amount, and we didn't have any students respond that they had never heard of it. So I guess that's a good thing. They're at least familiar with these terms. And then looking at their sources for information, So these were the places where they said they had heard about global warming or climate change before. School came in first, followed a pretty close second by television, then their friends and family, printed materials. Internet came in almost last, and then there were a couple other sources that kids mentioned. And then the question about where they would turn if they'd like to learn more information. We see a little bit of a change because the internet came in first on this one. So if they wanted to learn more, they would turn to the internet. Second was teachers or school. And then the others kind of had low responses for television, printed materials. A few of them did select that they didn't want to learn more about climate change. And then friends and family came in last. So a little bit of it there. And then for the short answer results, when the kids were asked how climate change would affect the planet, we had about 3/4 of the kids who responded to this question. And of those that responded, 50% commented on the fact that temperatures would go up and that it would get, there would be more heat or it would get hotter. So that was kind of the overall majority of those responses. Next, when they were asked how it would affect the ocean, again, about 3/4 of the kids responded to this one. And of those who responded, 44% commented on sea level rising or there being more water. There were some comments made about the ice caps melting, so that would result in more water. But then kind of as a twist, you can see that 16% of the respondents commented on that there would be less water or drying up or evaporation. So I guess where they're coming from on this angle is they think that if it gets hotter, then the water will evaporate. So you can see there was some confusion for this question. Next, as to how it would affect Florida, we had a few less respondents for this question, just over 50%. And of those who responded, 36% commented that Florida would flood or it would be underwater. And there were also a few kids who just commented that Florida, the heat would rise, it would get hotter, which would make it a more uncomfortable place to live. And then how it would affect people. Again, we had about 60% that responded to this one, and really the vast majority of the kids who answered of how it would affect people, 75% of them referenced illness or death. So apparently they see some pretty dire consequences for people when it comes to climate change. All right, the next couple of questions. This was how much risk they felt both they faced and the planet faced from climate change in the next 50 years. So you can see in the darker blue here, this is their personal risk. The gray is the planet risk. So these were actually pretty closely tied. And the kids definitely thought they faced a high or medium risk. Then going towards the action side of kind of similar results here as well. You know, these kids really thought that they should be doing quite a bit to help reduce the impacts of climate change. So to me, it's encouraging that they see, you know, there's not only a risk to the planet, but they take it personally and they really see that they can take personal action to help reduce these effects. All right, so some of the conclusions. Schools definitely need to be acting. You know, teachers and students are looking to learn about these issues. So again, things like professional development, also making sure these issues are incorporated into the curriculum are really important moving forward. You know, I thought it was fairly reassuring to see in the survey that many of the students do in fact see their schools and teachers as a resource. So, you know, we definitely need to fulfill that role and become that source for them. And next, I think there's definitely a great potential for new websites that are targeted at students surrounding things like climate change and global warming. You know, if you think back to the data where the kids indicated where they had heard information on these issues, not many of them had heard any information from the internet, but yet that was the one source they said they would turn to first if they wanted to learn more information about these issues. So, you know, I'm sure that there are websites that exist through agencies like NOAA and EPA, but clearly the kids either aren't familiar with them or they're just not attractive enough for the kids to visit the sites on their leisure time. So I think there's really a good potential here for people to be targeting kids using websites. And then another aspect of these websites could be that they could provide content, activities, and lesson plans for the teachers, so they could really be getting some of that professional development that they're looking for through these websites. So it's kind of a win-win situation. So I will just leave you here with a couple of the citations from this presentation, and I look forward to everyone's questions and comments. Thank you very much.